Hey YouTube, so I want to make a quick video talking about Zeno's paradox, and what brought it to my attention was I was just reading a book by Ursula Le Guin called The Dispossessed, which is the first book by her that I've actually read, and in it there was a small reference to Zeno's paradox, or what we generally think of as Zeno's paradox, and it reminded me that I'd been aware or made aware of this very popular variation of it quite some time ago, and apparently it's been something that philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, etc. have sort of pondered over the many thousands of years since it was first presented by the Greek philosopher who came up with the idea. And I do remember that when I checked out a couple of YouTube videos, I wasn't actually overly satisfied with their explanation. So I was listening to this audiobook, and I found myself just lying in bed and kind of pondering the paradox. And I pretty much just came up with my own answer as to why the paradox is not a paradox at all, and why it is actually wrong. And the whole thing was actually a rather clever sleight of hand right from the beginning. So, for better or worse, I'm just going to talk about my solution to Zeno's paradox. And if I could transport myself back thousands of years and have a discussion with Zeno, I'd tell him exactly why the whole thing is invalid. So here we go. Let's start by just presenting the basic concept. So imagine that you have a length defined by a starting point A and an ending point B, and you want to travel from A to B. In order to do that, you pass through the halfway point. So what Zeno says is you can, if you wanted to, you could relabel that halfway point as your new starting point. And then you can again travel to the new halfway point, and you can then relabel that halfway point as the new starting point. And theoretically you can do that into infinity, meaning that you can get ever closer to your destination B, but you can never actually get there. So the question is, why is that reasoning wrong? Because obviously we know it is wrong, but it's like explaining it in clear and concise terms is kind of the interesting part of the challenge. So what I came up with was the whole idea that the correct way to think about it is that if you were traveling from point A to point B, and you were traveling at a constant velocity of, let's say A to B is exactly 1 kilometer's distance, and let's say you are traveling at a velocity of 1 kilometer per second, 1 kilometer per hour, so a nice leisurely pace. So it therefore logically follows that you will make it to point B after 1 hour. It's really that simple. So if that is logically true, then what is it about Zeno that's wrong? Because obviously these two logical deductions don't follow, because they lead to a different result. So what it actually turns out is that what Zeno is proposing is a kind of a false equivalency, because he suggests that his scenario and the scenario I just outlined are equivalent, and they're not equivalent at all. What Zeno is actually saying is this. He's saying if you take a length and you divide it by 2, thus halving its length, and then you travel along one of those lengths, and then take the length that you haven't travelled along, divide that by 2, and then travel along one of those lengths, and then take the other length that you haven't travelled along, divide that by 2, and then travel along one of those lengths. Well, obviously you can keep doing that forever, because basically all he's describing here is an infinite divide by 2, where you only ever travel down 1/2 of the length after you've divided it. So that is not even remotely equivalent to the concept of just simply travelling a finite length at a given velocity. So simply put, it is a false equivalency, and it is not a paradox at all when you break it down and think about it in those terms. So I know there are other ways that people have talked about this paradox and trying to solve it, but I don't think with what I've just explained that there's any need, because clearly I've highlighted, I think, very obviously that basically it was a load of bollocks to begin with. But just for the sake of completeness, I think one other way people have thought about it, or one other possible solution, which I don't find that satisfying, is the sort of idea that spaces, in a finite space, is not infinitely divisible, and you can consider something like Planck's length, which is some ludicrously low value. I think it's like 10 to the minus 35 meters or something like that. It's insanely small, but it's kind of defined, I think, as the smallest possible length. So you could argue that you can't actually divide down any lower than that anyway. But I don't think that really gets to the heart of why the paradox was just a poorly posed originally, and kind of uses a sleight of hand to create a false equivalency. So yeah, anyway, that's my solution to Zeno's paradox. Hope you like it. Cheers.